Carl Jung reveals the 18 signs. You're entering the most powerful phase of your life. What if everything falling apart in your life right now is actually a sign that you're about to enter the most powerful, soul-aligned phase you've ever known? Carl Jung didn't just believe in healing. He mapped the exact signs that your soul is evolving. And today, you'll discover the truth no one ever told you about your deepest transformation. Part 1. The cracking of the ego. A call from within. At the threshold of any deep psychological transformation, Carl Jung emphasized that the first and often most unsettling sign is the disruption of the ego. This isn't simply a loss of confidence or a period of emotional instability. It's the breakdown of the constructed self you've unknowingly worshipped. It's the beginning of the death of the false you, and Jung saw this as the sacred initiation into a greater phase of individuation. The ego, as Jung defined it, is the center of consciousness. It's the story you tell yourself about who you are, your roles, preferences, social identities, goals, and even your traumas. Over time, most people mistake this surface structure for their total being. However, when life begins to strip that structure apart, when the beliefs you've clung to begin to falter, and when your old motivations suddenly feel hollow, this is not failure. This is the first undeniable sign. The ego is cracking open so the self can rise. Jung noted that people often misinterpret this moment as depression, burnout, or a midlife crisis. But from the lens of depth psychology, what's happening is far more profound. The psyche is shifting its energy inward. Your unconscious mind, previously content with remaining hidden, is now demanding attention. That strange inner pull you're beginning to feel? That's your true self knocking on the walls of your ego shell. This cracking doesn't always appear as a dramatic collapse. It can begin subtly through a growing dissatisfaction with your career, your relationships, or the way you've been living. Things that once brought you joy no longer satisfy. Your daily routines feel meaningless. You look around and realize you've been sleepwalking. But instead of panic, a strange clarity begins to emerge. This isn't who I really am. This was just a mask. According to Jung, this is what initiates the individuation process, the lifelong unfolding of the self. It starts with the recognition that the ego has limits, that it cannot carry the full burden of meaning, that beyond your persona, the mask you wear for society, lies a deeper essence waiting to be discovered. And to reach it, the ego must crack, fragment, and make room. Jung wrote extensively on this phase, describing it as a sacred wounding. You lose the illusion of control, and that illusion hurts. But paradoxically, this pain is evidence of growth. He often compared it to the myth of the hero's journey, where the call to adventure begins with a disturbance in the ordinary world. If you've begun to feel that nothing fits anymore, that your identity is too tight, too rehearsed, too dead, then you're being summoned into the depths. And that's the first sign you are about to enter the best phase of your life. Why? Because once the ego begins to crack, the unconscious begins to speak. You may notice more vivid dreams. You may feel intuitions rising like whispers from your soul. Synchronicities, those strange coincidences Jung called meaningful chance, begin to increase. You might find yourself drawn to books, music, or conversations that touch something deep inside, something you didn't even know was missing. The ego doesn't like this. It resists, fights back, clings to old narratives, but the soul has already begun the uprising. And as Jung once said, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. This moment of ego cracking is your psyche demanding that you evolve. So if you find yourself questioning everything, if you feel like your old identity is dying, don't run. Sit with it. Witness the collapse without judgment. Because in the ashes of who you thought you were, the self is preparing to emerge. And that's the first great threshold. You're no longer living from your ego. You're being led by something far deeper, your soul. Part 2. The inner death. When the soul prepares for rebirth. As the ego begins to fragment, another powerful psychological phenomenon emerges, what Jung referred to as a psychic death. This is not about the body dying, but rather the death of the psychological structures that have defined your life until now. It's a descent into what can feel like utter emptiness, confusion, or emotional numbness. But Jung insisted this death is necessary. Without it, the rebirth of the self cannot occur. Most people fear this stage because it mimics many symptoms of depression. You may wake up and feel hollow. The things you once loved, hobbies, people, ambitions, now feel meaningless. You might say, I feel nothing. But this isn't apathy. This is your soul withdrawing its energy from your old life. It's pulling back from everything that no longer serves your deeper truth. Jung described this moment as nigredo in alchemical psychology, the blackening stage, the descent into chaos and darkness. But unlike clinical depression, this inner void carries meaning. It is not a malfunction, but a preparation. It means you're no longer living unconsciously. Your soul has outgrown your former reality, and now the psyche must go dark so that the seeds of something truer can take root. One of Jung's key insights was that transformation often begins with a breakdown of psychic unity. That is, your inner world becomes disjointed, and the pieces of your old personality no longer work together. You can't fake it anymore. You can't go back to the job that drains you, the relationship that limits you, or the beliefs that once felt safe. Everything is being dismantled because you're preparing to rebuild on a new foundation. This stage feels brutal because your conscious mind can't yet see the full picture. The self, your total, whole being, knows what's coming, but your ego does not. The ego feels like it's dying because in many ways it is. It's losing control. And in Western society, where identity is often built on achievement and status, this collapse can be terrifying. But Jung's psychology offers reassurance. This death is sacred. The numbness, the detachment, the loss of passion, these are not signs you are broken. They are signs your inner world is reorganizing. Just as a caterpillar must dissolve in the cocoon before becoming a butterfly, the psyche must dissolve its outdated structures before revealing something entirely new. And here's the paradox Jung points out. The more you surrender to this inner death, the more quickly the rebirth will come. But the ego doesn't want to surrender. It wants to hold on, to fix the pain, to return to what was. It might try to numb the discomfort through distractions, addictions, or spiritual bypassing. But Jung warned against that. He believed that true transformation only occurs when we face the darkness directly, when we allow the old to die with full awareness. There is a strange beauty in this moment. You begin to realize that you don't have to carry the weight of your old self anymore. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to perform. You are finally being stripped down to essence. And while that process is raw and vulnerable, it's also profoundly liberating. This is the second great sign that you're entering the best phase of your life. You feel like you're dying inside, but that inner death is exactly what's making room for the life you were truly meant to live. When you allow the psychic death to happen without resistance, you become a fertile ground for transformation. You are no longer a slave to your past. You are no longer hypnotized by the need to conform. You are standing naked at the crossroads, vulnerable, yes, but also open for the first time to what is truly yours. And from this dark, quiet space, the stirrings of new life begin. Part 3. The uprising of the unconscious. When hidden forces begin to guide you. As the ego cracks and the old self dies away, a new force begins to rise to the surface, the unconscious. Jung viewed the unconscious not as a chaotic pit of irrationality, but as the great storehouse of human potential, wisdom, archetypes, and unexpressed truths. When you begin to sense this force stirring inside you, it's a powerful sign that you are being prepared for transformation, not by the mind you've always relied on, but by the deeper self that has always been watching. The uprising of the unconscious can be quiet or dramatic. For some, it arrives in dreams, vivid, symbolic, and strange. For others, it comes through synchronicities, repeating numbers, meaningful coincidences, uncanny alignments. But regardless of the form, the message is the same. Something bigger than your ego is trying to reach you. Jung described the unconscious as compensatory. That is, it attempts to balance what the conscious mind lacks. If you've been living an overly rational life, the unconscious might send images of passion, chaos, or feeling. If you've been people-pleasing, it might stir up anger or rebellion. If you've silenced your creativity, it may awaken wild and unpredictable dreams. This is not random. This is your psyche's way of pushing you toward wholeness. One of the most powerful signs that the unconscious is rising is that you start to feel things before you can understand them. You may be drawn to certain people, symbols, colors, or emotions, and you don't know why. Something in you begins to crave meaning on a level you can't articulate. You might find yourself saying things like, "I don't know why, but I just feel this is important." That's not confusion. That's intuition breaking through the ego's rigid logic. Jung argued that true transformation only happens when the unconscious and the conscious begin a dialogue. And that dialogue often begins with discomfort. You may feel unsettled. You may begin to question everything. Your beliefs, your habits, your identity. You may even feel like you're losing control, But Jung would say this is precisely where the soul wants you. Because control is the ego's domain, but surrender is the domain of the self. In fact, Jung saw the unconscious not only as personal, your memories, traumas, desires, but also collective. Within it lie the shared archetypes of humanity, images and forces like the hero, the mother, the shadow, the wise old man. As these begin to stir, you may find yourself stepping into roles or energies you never imagined. You might feel a sudden urge to protect, to lead, to create, or to question, because something ancient is awakening in you. This is the uprising, a psychological revolution that begins quietly but changes everything. It's a sign that your soul no longer wants to live a scripted life. It no longer wants to be reasonable. It wants to be authentic, and the unconscious is the voice of that authenticity. During this time, you may also notice an increase in synchronicities, what Jung called meaningful coincidences. These aren't just random events. They are moments where the external world aligns perfectly with your inner experience, almost as if the universe is whispering directly to you. The more you open to the unconscious, the more these alignments appear, and each one carries a message. You are not alone, and you are being guided. But guidance from the unconscious doesn't come with a clear map. It comes in symbols, emotions, and intuitive nudges. That's why Jung emphasized the importance of paying attention, not with your intellect, but with your inner eye. Keep a dream journal. Observe patterns. Feel into the images that haunt you or inspire you. Because what your ego sees as confusion, the unconscious reveals as coded language from the soul. This rising force may also make you feel like you're breaking down at times. But what's really happening is that your former psychic structure is making room for something larger and wiser. You're becoming receptive to your total self, not just the part of you that fits into society, but the part that belongs to the mystery of life itself. And so the third great sign that you're entering the best phase of your life is this. You feel pulled by something you can't explain. Your unconscious is no longer quiet. It's rising to claim its place in your life. And that means you are awakening. Part 4. The emergence of the shadow. When the darkness demands to be seen. Once the unconscious begins to rise, it doesn't just bring insight, intuition, and inspiration. It also brings confrontation. One of the first forces to emerge from the depths is what Carl Jung famously called the shadow. If the unconscious is the entire unknown portion of the psyche, then the shadow is the part we most actively avoid. It contains everything we repress, deny, disown, or are ashamed of. And when the shadow surfaces, you are standing at a critical threshold of transformation. Jung insisted that encountering the shadow is not optional. It is essential. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, he wrote. And the pain begins when you start to see that you are not only what you present to the world. You are not only your kindness, your intelligence, your work ethic, your politeness. Beneath those socially acceptable masks live darker, more primal parts of you. Anger, jealousy, fear, resentment, selfishness, lust, manipulation. These qualities are not necessarily evil, but they are inconvenient to the ego. So you hide them, rationalize them, project them onto others. You hate in others what you cannot accept in yourself. But when the shadow arises, often triggered by crisis, heartbreak, or spiritual awakening, those hidden qualities demand to be acknowledged. And here's the paradox. Jung teaches the emergence of the shadow is not a sign of regression. It is a sign of evolution. You are being invited to integrate, to become whole. And that can only happen when the parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding finally come into the light of your awareness. This integration process often shows up as emotional turbulence. You might snap at people more easily. You may become defensive, insecure, or reactive. You might feel shame for thoughts you never had before. You may even feel a temporary loss of identity. Why am I thinking this way? Why am I acting like this? But this is the shadow speaking, and instead of rejecting it, Jung advises, get curious. The shadow appears not to punish you, but to complete you. Let's say you've always identified as the good person, helpful, selfless, responsible. The shadow may suddenly bring out rage or bitterness you didn't know existed. This isn't a flaw. It's feedback. Perhaps you've overextended yourself. Perhaps you've ignored your own needs. Perhaps you've been good at the expense of being real. The shadow shows you what the ego cannot admit, that your light becomes stronger when it has roots in your darkness. Jung warned that if the shadow is not confronted, it doesn't disappear. It controls you from the background. Unconscious anger becomes passive aggression. Repressed desire becomes self-sabotage. Buried fear becomes control. But once you make the unconscious conscious, those forces become your allies. They stop hijacking your behavior and start empowering your integrity. Facing the shadow is brutal because it destroys the image you've built of yourself. But this destruction is sacred. It clears the way for your true self. Not the persona, not the performance, but the whole. Integrated you. The one who can love without losing yourself, who can lead without domination, who can speak your truth without guilt. During this phase, you may experience more intense projections. You might become irritated or emotionally triggered by people who mirror your disowned traits. This is where the work becomes most potent. Ask yourself, what part of me am I seeing in them that I haven't accepted in myself? Every emotional reaction becomes a doorway into deeper understanding. This is also where many turn back because the shadow is not pretty. It doesn't flatter you. It breaks your illusions. But if you stay, if you allow the darkness to reveal its teachings, you will begin to notice something astonishing. Your fear of yourself dissolves. You no longer need to hide. You no longer need to perform. You no longer need to lie to yourself to feel worthy. And that is the fourth undeniable sign that you are entering the best phase of your life. Your darkness is no longer your enemy. It has become your greatest teacher. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." If you're willing to face your shadow, not just intellectually, but emotionally, you are no longer stuck in the superficial layers of life. You are stepping into depth, complexity, and ultimately wholeness. Part 5, Inner Conflict Intensifies. The soul begins its purification. As the shadow surfaces and the unconscious makes itself known, your inner world begins to shift into a psychological battleground. You are no longer moving through life as a single unified self. Instead, you become a conflict of opposites. This is not dysfunction. It is a necessary stage of Jungian transformation. Your soul is initiating a purification process, one that cannot occur without internal struggle. Carl Jung described this phase as the confrontation between consciousness and unconsciousness, between the ego and the self, between the persona and the shadow. And the result is not peace, at least not at first. The result is chaos, contradiction, and emotional friction. You may feel like you're being torn apart from the inside out. One day you are deeply compassionate. The next, you're bitterly resentful. One moment you crave solitude. The next, you're aching for connection. One part of you wants to let go of the past. Another part clings desperately to it. This inner division is not a sign that something has gone wrong. In Jungian terms, it means the opposites within your psyche are beginning to polarize so that they can be integrated. The soul cannot evolve until it becomes conscious of its fragmented nature. And so the tension increases, not to destroy you, but to awaken you. Jung believed that psychological wholeness can only be achieved by holding the tension of opposites without trying to collapse it prematurely. Most people want to resolve their contradictions quickly, to pick a side, make a decision, shut down the discomfort. But transformation lives in the ability to sit in the fire, to allow conflicting desires, beliefs, and emotions to coexist without trying to silence one or exalt the other. You may, for example, feel a powerful drive to step into your purpose, but also deep fear of failure. You may long for intimacy, but also dread the vulnerability it demands. You may want to break free from an old life, but find yourself secretly nostalgic for its comfort. Jung called this state an antiodromia, the tendency of all things to turn into their opposites when pushed too far. This is not confusion. This is psyche in motion, and in this motion, your soul begins its purification like a river flushing out sediment. The psychological conflict washes away the illusions, the conditioning, and the lies you've lived under. What you believed about yourself, what you believed about success, love, identity, and truth is tested. Anything that's not rooted in your authentic nature begins to crumble under the weight of inner contradiction. This stage can be exhausting. You might feel emotionally overwhelmed or mentally fragmented. You may cry without knowing why. You might question your sanity, your path, even your worth. But Jung reminds us, when things fall apart inside, it's often because something deeper is trying to come together. In fact, one of the most important signs of this purification is moral conflict. Not in the religious sense, but in the existential sense. You begin to ask yourself, am I living in alignment with who I really am? Am I making choices out of fear or out of truth? What am I pretending not to know? These questions don't have immediate answers. They create pressure. They demand stillness. They require honesty. And as uncomfortable as this may be, this pressure is the soul's fire. It's burning away the false, the performative, and the borrowed. The more intense the conflict, the more raw the purification. Jung's notion of individuation, the process of becoming your true, whole self, depends entirely on your ability to endure this phase. Not avoid it, not shortcut it, but endure it. To feel the guilt, the regret, the desire, the rage, and allow it to transform you, not define you. Because once these energies are seen, named, and felt fully, they begin to harmonize into something entirely new. This is the fifth undeniable sign. You're entering the best phase of your life. Your inner world is no longer a quiet denial. It's an honest storm, and that storm is washing you clean. To the ego, this feels like losing control. To the self, it feels like being reborn. You are no longer interested in half-truths or hollow victories. You are not here to survive your life. You are here to embody it in its full emotional and spiritual reality. That embodiment begins by walking through this fire of contradiction until what's real finally remains. Part 6. Strange Dreams. The soul speaks through symbols. As the inner conflict reaches its peak, a new language begins to emerge. One not spoken by the rational mind, but by the symbolic voice of the unconscious. And nowhere is this voice more alive than in your dreams. According to Carl Jung, when the conscious ego is overwhelmed, destabilized, or in transition, the unconscious speaks louder and more vividly through images, archetypes, and symbols while you sleep. That's why during times of inner transformation, your dreams often become strange, intense, and unforgettable. Jung believed that dreams are not random or meaningless. Quite the opposite. He saw them as direct expressions of the soul, offering critical insight into what the conscious mind cannot yet understand. A strange dream during this time is not to be dismissed. It is to be studied. It may reveal truths you're not yet ready to accept, directions you've ignored, or potentials you've barely begun to awaken. At this stage of psychological rebirth, your dreams often become more symbolic than literal. You may dream of floods, broken houses, wild animals, death, rebirth, or unfamiliar landscapes. These images are not accidents. They are archetypal messages drawn from the collective unconscious. They bypass your intellect and speak directly to your soul. For example, a dream about a house collapsing may reflect the breaking down of your old self. A dream about being lost in the forest might symbolize the descent into the unknown layers of your psyche. Seeing snakes, wolves, or dragons can represent primal instincts or the emerging power of the shadow. And encountering a child, a wise elder, or a wounded figure may point to neglected parts of yourself seeking reintegration. Jung referred to these symbolic figures as autonomous complexes, psychic fragments with their own energy and voice. In dreams, these complexes are no longer hidden. They walk, speak, and confront you. The more intense the transformation you're undergoing, the more dramatic the dream material becomes. But instead of fearing it, Jung encourages us to treat dreams as guides and sacred messengers. This is why Jung developed the technique of dream interpretation through amplification. He taught that we must not reduce dreams to simple meanings like, "You dreamt of water, so you're emotional." Instead, we must amplify the symbols, connect them to myth, to cultural stories, to our personal lives, and to universal archetypes. Through this process, your dreams become a mirror of your deepest psychological and spiritual process. You may notice a pattern. The more you ignore a truth in your waking life, the louder it becomes in your dreams. The unconscious is relentless in its pursuit of wholeness, and when your soul is preparing you for a new phase of life, your dreams begin to act like spiritual blueprints. They may not offer exact answers, but they show you where to look, what to feel, and what to question. And here's a secret Jung knew well. Your ego may lie, but your dreams do not. They are honest, brutally honest, and during times of ego death, they often contain the wisdom you most need, if you're willing to see it. Keeping a dream journal during this phase is not just helpful, it's essential. Write down your dreams the moment you wake. Reflect on the images, emotions, and transitions. Over time, patterns will emerge, themes will repeat, and you'll start to realize your soul has been speaking to you in symbols long before your conscious mind caught up. Some people experience what Jung called big dreams during this period, profound, numinous dreams that feel larger than life. These dreams often signal a major psychological turning point. You may wake up with tears in your eyes or with the sense that something has changed. These are not ordinary dreams. These are initiations. And that brings us to the sixth powerful sign that you're entering the best phase of your life. Your dreams are no longer background noise. They are maps. They are revealing the inner architecture of your transformation. You are no longer being guided only by reason. You are being led by symbol, by image, by ancient language. Your soul is awakening, and it's speaking in the only way it knows how, through metaphor, mystery, and vision. Jung believed that if you learn to listen to your dreams, you will never again be truly lost. Because even in your darkest moments, the unconscious will offer a light, not to lead you back to the old life, but to guide you into the deeper one that is waiting. Part 7. Withdrawing from the crowd, the demand for sacred solitude. One of the most unexpected yet transformative signs that you're entering the best phase of your life is a growing disinterest in the social noise that once occupied your mind and time. Suddenly, small talk exhausts you. Crowds feel overstimulating. Even your closest relationships might start to feel distant, not because you've become antisocial or cold, but because something within you has shifted. According to Carl Jung, this urge to withdraw is not a regression. It is a deep psychological necessity. When the soul begins to undergo profound change, it instinctively seeks solitude, not isolation in the pathological sense, but sacred separation, a pause from the external so the internal can be heard. Jung believed that growth of consciousness is not possible if a person remains embedded in collective thinking. To hear your own soul, you must first step out of the voices of the tribe. At this point in the process, you're no longer content with surface-level conversations or relationships built on convenience. You start craving depth, truth, and resonance. But those qualities are rare in modern social environments, especially in digital culture where performance often replaces presence. This creates a natural distancing, not out of arrogance but out of alignment. Jung referred to this process as individuation, the development of one's unique psychological and spiritual identity. And individuation, by its very nature, demands a withdrawal from the collective. You cannot become your true self while constantly trying to fit into the molds that society, family, or peer groups have carved for you. The ego wants to belong, but the soul wants to become. And the soul can only become when